With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Yud Beis. We left off on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We are looking for a source for the conclusion, for the ending of the Mishnah on Daf Yud Aleph. The Mishnah writes, Zeh HaKlal, that kol shehu mekabel tumah, if something is susceptible to becoming tamei, it's a keli, it's a food item, and or the ein gedule min haaretz, even if it's not susceptible to becoming tamei, but if it did not grow from the ground, that's an item which may not be used for schach. And the Mishnah then speaks out the reverse, that schach must be something that's not susceptible to becoming tamei, and it must be something that gedule min haaretz. And the Gemara began with minohan amili. We left off by learning the first approach given by Reish Lakish, being that clouds, as recorded in Bereshis, comes from the aid, from mist, that comes up from the Aretz. And as we explained, we consider, according to Reish Lakish, clouds being something that's gedule min haaretz. Clouds are not susceptible to becoming tamei, because tamei is adam kelim, oichlin, or mashkin. Anything that's not in these 4 is, to begin with, not an item that's susceptible to becoming tamei. And as we right away discovered, and since the schach, according to Reish Lakish, which will be according only to one Tana, is to remind us of the Anani Yakovid, so they have to be similar to the Anani Yakovid. And therefore, indeed, the Gemara said that that's a Gavaldik source, Liman da Amar, that the schach is connected to the Anani Yakovid. According to the other Tana, we had a machloikes in Girsois, who is that other Tana? That the Anani Yakoved and the Lamandiedu Doiresechem, that Ki Oishafti as Bnei Yisrael, that God Almighty had us dwell in Sukah. If that is referring to literal booths, so then the source of the clouds is non-existent, and we're back looking for a source. And today's daf will begin with various other sources. Before we continue with the introduction, just to conclude, there was a Tosfos actually on Daf Yud Beis that reminds us of the following. Tosfos brings a Yerushalmi, because Reish Lakish is the one that gave the first answer, clouds. The new answers that we have today, at least 2 of them, will be in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan rejects using cloud as the source for the 2 dinim in schach. Actually, where do clouds come from? So Tosfos here quotes a Yerushalmi that this is also subject to a machloikes. Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish, their machloikes is recorded in the Yerushalmi. Whether anonim come from above, or whether anonim come from below. Now the whole reason why we are saying that anonim, that the clouds are a source for the dinim and schach, is because they are gedule min haaretz. Are clouds gedule min haaretz? So he quotes from a Yerushalmi, machloikes Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish. My friends, l'choyre, that's connected to our machloikes that we have in Bavli on Tainis Daf Tes Amid Beis, as to where does the rain come from. L'choyre, one is connected to the other. If you remember that, it's very strange. Rain, you say rain comes from the waters of the earth. There is a shita brought down in Torah that the liquid, however you'll understand that, comes from the heavens. And from there it goes into the clouds and back here down on the earth. So that's really all subject to our machloikes. So we're going to begin today's daf on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis, quoting other sources for both dinim in schach. We're going to have on Daf Yud Beis a Mishnah, and subsequently the rest of the daf will be various items that theoretically you would argue would fit into the items that are kosher for schach. Like, for example, bundles of straw. Geduli min haaretz. It's not yet made into a keli. It's not going to be mechuber. It was just bundled. Yet the Mishnah is going to teach us that one may not use bundles for schach. We will also be learning, we'll be quoting a Mishnah that we'll have a bit later, that if you have a haystack, also hay that's already not longer mechuber lakarka, it's a big haystack, and you hollow it out. And when you hollow it out, you have in there the minimum size height, you have 10 tefachim or more, you have the 7x7. That's also not going to be a valid sukkah. Rabbi Yechanan, speaking about both of the Mishnayos, said that one of these 2 Mishnayos, we didn't remember that there was a concept of tasav eloim ha'asoi, as we will repeat, as we already introduced this concept in the previous dafim, that we have to make schach and not use that which was already made. There is also a unique Takonas Chachamim, a Gzeira, called Gezeiras Oitzer. The Chachamim were afraid that people might use a storage shed, which typically had on it schach, but that was not placed there to provide shade. It was placed there for storage. And if you remember, even though we talk a paskin like Beis Hillel, that schach does not need to be placed l'shem mitzvahs Sukah, but it has to be placed there to provide shade and shelter. And we're going to see that one of these two Mishnayos' invalidation is connected to Tasav Elohim and Ha'asoi, another one is connected to Gezeiras Oitzer. We're going to figure out which one is which, and that's very negay, even Lamaisa. We're going to learn further about other items that used to have arrow shafts. So there's something called a male arrow shaft. We'll explain that on Amud Beis. A female arrow shaft and a male arrow shaft is really a pshutei kleitz. We'll explain all that, and therefore it's kasher eshchach. A female arrow shaft, it has a beis kibul. A beis kibul makes it into a keli. Once it's a keli, it becomes susceptible to becoming taming, and therefore it's not valid for schach. We're going to learn other psulim that if a schach has a offensive odor, to the point that people don't want to stay in the sukkah, it's also not a usable schach, and many other dinim in schach and much more. And again, let us start on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. After we rejected, at least L'Kula Alma, the approach of using the clouds as the source for the dinim and the Mishnah, it has to be not mekabel tuma. It has to be something, yes, that gedulim in haaretz. So now we'll continue finding other sources. Says the Gemara Ki Asad Avdimi. When Avdimi came to Bavel, coming with the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, quoting Amar Rebbe Yochanan, that Amar Kra, it says in Parshas Re'ei, Chag HaSukkah is Taselacham. This is not the first time we already had this a few times above, that we are juxtaposing Sukkah with Chag, al pi drush. Chag referring to the carbon Chagigam, Makis Sukkah LaChagigam. We're speaking about the animal, the carbon. That ma Chagigam, an animal is davar she'einoi mekabel tumam. The only living being that biblically is susceptible to becoming tamei is a living Jew. An animal is not even susceptible while it's alive, which is we're speaking about the carbon. And here comes the wow line, the last line in the Amid. Listen to this, that an animal is called Gidulei min haaretz. This is not the only time you read about this. How can you say an animal is called Gidulei min haaretz? How is it growing from the ground? So really, Rashi right away tells us that what the Havamina is that, yeah, an animal doesn't grow out of the ground, but it could be called Gedulei Karka. Because since an animal draws its nourishment from items that grow from the ground, then you can call it somehow Gedulei min haaretz. Now, if that's the case, isn't everything Gedulei Karka? I mean, doesn't everything draw nourishment from the ground? And that's why Rashi here, this is not the only time we have this. Says no, and therefore there will be still a few things that will not be called, if that will be the way we will define Gedulei min haaretz or Gedulei Karka. Rashi brings that dagim, fish, or salt, or kemein and pitriyos, mushrooms and truffles, they don't get nourishment directly from things that grow from the ground. But anyways, that's the Havamina that we're going to consider Chag, the carbon Chagiga. We're making this hekesh to learn that it has to be something that's not Makabel Tuma, the last line in the Amit, V'gedulim min haaretz. So Chag HaSukkah is Af Sukkah, Davar she'ena Makabel Tuma, and V'gedulim min haaretz. And the question we're going to have, and therefore Rav Yochanan didn't say it, it can't be that he said it, or there'll be a kasha on a statement, Daf Yud Beis. If that's the case, now there are other limudim that we learn from this drasha of comparing the sukkah to a carbon chagiga. But if it's coming for this, then ima chagiga balachayim av sukkah nami balachayim. And balachayim means, why can't you use balachayim for schach? Now there are many approaches to this question. Minimally, why would we not be allowed to take the hide of an animal and use it as schach? If we are calling an animal Gedulei min haaretz, or at least Gedulei Karka. And don't forget, guys, the hide of an animal prior to you making it into a keli, it's not Makabel Tuma. It's a raw material. And no one is of the opinion that one may use an animal part for
unprocessed hide, right?
An unprocessed hide. Very good. If it will be processed, then it's already an issue of maybe it's already mekabel tumah. If it's made into a mat, ukadoima. Oh, so therefore, in other words, what's mashma here is not that we have a question on Rabbi Yechanan. So there was a misunderstanding over here. So indeed, when Ravin came, that's the normal. Rav Dimi came in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Normally Ravin came later, and he quotes Rabbi Yechanan, a different source. And again, Rabbi Yechanan is rejecting the source of Reish Lakish, just to repeat the Tosfos over here, not only because the source of the aid from the cloud is only good if we are going to subscribe to the Tana that holds that the schach is to remind us of the clouds. But furthermore, again, that's the Tosfos saying over here, that if anonim, and that's Shitas Rabbi Yechanan, if they originate from Lemaila, and not from Gedulei Min Haaretz, it also won't be a good source. Not according to any opinion. So Amar Rabbi Yechanan Amar Kra, when it says Ba'aspecha Migarnacha Umiyikvecha. Now really, just to know, the pasuk begins by telling us that Chag HaSukkah is Taselecha, that we should make the festival of Sukkot. The pshat is during the time of the year when we're gathering that which is on the threshing floor, when we are gathering that which is in the wine vat. That's the pshat. It's, in other words, that pasuk is just telling us when Chag HaSukkos is. But the drasha is that what should be used for the sukkah, meaning schach, the schach should come bipsoiles goyren v'yakev. We use the refuse, the leftovers from what remains on the threshing floor, from that which remains after you used the grapes, rendering them into wine. In other words, when after the grapes are pressed, what do you have left? You have these empty clusters. We're emphasizing something important, guys. Chevra, food, we all know that food is something that's susceptible to tumah. So if the pasuk would be translated literally, that you should make schach from wheat, if they would still have the kernels in them, that will be a problem. Fakert. Then we would see over here that schach could be made even from something that's mekabel tumah. But now that we're darshaning that the pasuk means that after we gathered and we threshed, we finished threshing, we already made the grapes into wine. We already put them into the vat. So the psoiles is takanat oichel. And the psoiles would be a great, the stalks of straw. That will be a great schach source, and they meet these two dinim. They're not mekabel tumah, because they're not oichel anymore, and they did grow from the ground, and now they're disconnected. So says the Gemara asking on Rabbi Yechanan, I know if you're telling me that the pshat and the pasuk isn't only the time of Sukkot, but it's that which we use for the schach, the Torah doesn't say the word psoilis. Ve'ema goyden atzmai, ve'yakev atzmai. And that will be a kasha, because if the pasuk means to tell you that you can use that which is on the threshing floor prior to it being threshed, that means you can use wheat. That's called oichel already. Wheat is oichel. Grapes is oichel. And we know that no, you cannot use anything that's mekabel tumah. So Amar Rab Zera, since the Torah says yekev, and yekev doesn't mean grapes, yekev means wine. Wine cannot be used for schach. So we have this drasha, but we see that yekev cannot mean wine mamish. It must mean the psoilis of the grapes after you squeeze them out. Perfect. And now they're no longer considered oichel. So that was a good answer. However, maskiv lo Rabbi Yirmiyah, I disagree with you, because there is a type of yekev. There is something that could be called wine, which could be used for schach. I know that liquid wine cannot be used for schach, but maybe it means yayin karush, congealed wine, typically like the wine that was made, or that the congealed wine that we have in the location called sinir, which is very similar to a gulei devela. It's like pressed cakes of figs. It's solid-like. That could be called yekev. And therefore, if you have this tradition that the pasuk is being merames to items that could be used for schach, not only during the time of the threshing and of the pressing, so where do you see in the pasuk that's the psoilis of? And that was a big question. And indeed, Amar Rab Zera, when he heard the question of Rabbi Yirmiyah, that hom milsa hava biyadin, when we had the second version of the answer of Rabbi Yechanan, Amar Ravin, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, this ba'aspacha megarnacha miyekvecha, we thought we got it, we thought we got the answer, but they came along Rabbi Yirmiyah, and his question was very strong. No one knew how to take away his question. And the expression that's used for us at Rabbi Yirmiyah, v'shada bein narga, he threw an axe. He ugishlag in our proof, and now we're back stuck. We don't chap, what did Rabbi Yechanan mean? So Rav Ashi Amar, this is all explaining the proof of Rabbi Yechanan, that the Torah uses a mem, right? It says, mi garnacha, not ba'aspecha garnacha, when you gather the threshing floor. No, from is a exclusionary expression. Not all of it, only some of it. From it. Mi garnecha, from the threshing floor. V'loy goyden atzmai. Similarly, mi yikvecha, from your wine vat. I know you can touch it in another way, but that's the way we darshan. The mem limits it. And we're not saying, what do I mean, some of it, 20% of it. No. We're saying that you have the wheat on the threshing floor prior to you removing the food from it. You have the vine press. You have the grapes prior for them being pressed. And then you have them as they are after they are emptied from their oichel. And that's the mi only after it's emptied. V'lo yekev atzmai. And that was enough to faremfer, to explain the source of Rabbi Yechanan as quoted by Ravin, and now Rab Chizda has another source. Rab Chizda Amar Mahachen, it's a pasuk in Nehemiah. So Uhar, go out to the mountains, the Aviwe light, and bring to me zayis, branches with olives. Va'ali ate shemen and leaves of an oil tree. Va'ali hadas and leaves of a hadas tree. Va'ali tamarim and palm tree leaves. Va'ali eats avos. Now avos means braided. Braided is one of the words that we actually use for a hadas, because when you braid, you're using 3 strands. And that is what's unique about the hadas, as we'll see later in this Masechta, that from one bud, 3 leaves grow out. Now, the pasuk is speaking about that which should be brought to use for a sukkah, and all of the items that are mentioned in the pasuk are items that meet these criteriums. They're gedulei min haaretz, they're being brought, they're disconnected, and there are items that are not susceptible to becoming tummy because it's not food items. That's the proof. Problem is, now that we quoted the pasuk, isn't the pasuk redundant? Because hadas and alei eitz avos is the same thing. Frekti Gemara, hainu hadas, hainu eitz avos. Amar Rab Chizda, no. That there's something called a hadas shoita. A hadas shoita is when you have one point, and from it you don't have the 3 leaves, only 2 leaves grow out. There is a 3rd leaf, but the 3rd leaf is going to be a little bit above, it's going to come out from a little bit below. That is termed in halacha as a foolish hadas. A hadas shoita. And that is not valid for the mitzvah of the dalad minim. So this pasuk is being meramis not only for that which is needed to use for the schach, but also for items that could be used for the dalad minim themselves. So let me just read the pasuk. So hadas shoita, which is not valid for the dalad minim, but again, it's gedulim min haaretz. It's not mekabel tuma. Once you bring it, right, it's not going to be mechuber. That's l'sukah. And the eitz avos, which is a proper braided, it's interesting that the hadas goes to the shoita. Braided taka means that there are 3 points. When you braid something, you begin your braid challah, right? You start with 3 strands and it begins from the same point. And that is something that's kosher enough for it even to be used for the lulav. Yeah, Danny.
So we mentioned those 2 that are the same. What about Ali Zayis?
I don't know, the same question. Sounds like the same thing, correct. It's if it means, maybe Ali Zayis means with the olives, I don't know. Kasha. Okay, Mishnah. So we already have the klolim, what is kosher or not for schach, and now we're going to have certain items that meet the criterion of that which we mentioned above. They're not going to be mechuber, geduli min haaretz, not criteria, not makabel tuma, and yet it won't be kosher unless the Mishnah has one din, bundles. Can't use bundles for schach. Says the Mishnah, whether it is chavile kash, bundles of straw. These are just classical, diber hakasuv or the Mishnah B'hoiva. People had bundles of straw, chavile eitzim, bundles of wood. They would bundle them. Chavile ziradim, bundles of cane. Says the Mishnah, a good picture, ein mesachachin bohen. They may not be used. And as we'll discover in the Gemara, that this Mishnah is a rabbinic din, midoiraisa der taka kosher. There's a gzeira, we'll see what the Chachamim were worried about, and that is of tremendous significance, because if the problem is only a problem midrabanan, now let's read the next line of the Mishnah, v'kulam shehitiran kisheiros. Once you untie them, they are kosher. And what needs to be emphasized is that since Taka will discover in the Gemara, will be a question in the beginning, that this is a derabanan. Since it's midrabanan, you don't have to linaneya. That was the whole sugya we had before. It's when you have schach on top of your sukkah that is invalid biblically. Even if you are misakin it, like for example, it's mechuber and you cut it off. We paskin like Shmuel. It's not enough for you to fix it. Now you have to lift it and put it back down. This is only a rabbinic problem. All you need to do is to fix the problem. Untie the little strings, undo the bundle, unbundle it. And automatically, as is, it's going to be kosher. Now, says the Mishnah, the word v'kulan, zakt Rashi, v'kulan is lashon nabim. V'kulam doesn't mean the bundles of kash, eitzim, and zeradim only. V'kulan means all of the items, not only from this Mishnah, that were mentioned in the Mishnayos above, that are not kosher to schach, they are kosher for the fanois. The Mishnah is telling you, don't apply the rules of schach for the walls. You can have a wall that's gedulim min haaretz. You can have a wall that's davar shemekabel tuma. Even the big, you can have a wall that's mechuber lakarka, a tree. All of the dinim that we are learning is dafka only b'neget to the schach and not b'neget to the din defanis. Now you have other dinim of defanis that we began the Masechta with, the minimum height, the maximum height, v'chulei, but not what is it made out of. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yaakov. So we have a Mishnah, and we already touched the Mishnah according to the Maskana, that our Mishnah disallows bundles midrabanan. Hold on. Says Rabbi Yaakov, I want you to know that Shameis Shemois minei de Rabbi Yechanan. When we were in the yeshiva, there were two Mishnayos, this Mishnah and another Mishnah, Daf Tezvav, we'll quote it in a moment. And concerning both of the Mishnayos, Rabbi Yechanan gave their reasons. He just didn't say which reason is for which Mishnah. So we were confused. We had a question. And it's a halachic question, as we'll see. That we heard from Rabbi Yechanan Tarte. Tarte means two explanations. One was concerning our Mishnah of disallowing using bundles for schach, and the other explanation of Rabbi Yechanan. We didn't say his explanation yet, but first, what's the Mishnah? Is the Mishnah that we have on Daf Tezvav. The Mishnah writes, "Hachoitet begadish." If one hollows out a haystack, you have a haystack, guys. The haystack is not mechuber anymore. So simple. Hollowing it out, as long as you make a open inner space of 10 tfachim height or more, 7 by 7. You should have a kasher to sukkah, right? And the Mishnah says, no. And when we were learning both Mishnayos, we quoted the following, that Rabbi Yechanan said regarding one, we just don't know which one. It's the Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan is called Gezeiras Oitzer. They were afraid that one will use a storage house for a sukkah. That's a choited begadish, whoever sees the picture. A storage house is a house that typically people will throw. It could even be bundles. They would put things in it. They would put things above it for storage. They didn't place the schach for shade. No one needs to have the area in it shaded, right? It's not like today. They want to keep the temperature cool. It's a storage area. A storage house may not be used. We'll speak about this a few details more in a moment. And one of these Mishnayos are connected to our Rabbanan, that if this would be allowed, then people perhaps might use the storage. Not to use a storage house, they disallowed one of these two Mishnayos. Another Mishnah was connected to the din that we learned, Tasev Eloi Min Ha'asui, that since while the sukkah was made, it wasn't kosher. Then when it becomes kosher, the schach is already there. And and that's a isur midoiraisa, that makes it invalid on a biblical level. And says the Gemara, says Rebbe Yaakov, v'lo yadana ha'minayim mishum oitzer, v'ha'minayim mishum tasa v'lo min ha'asui. And let me go by heart to explain that you can learn either way. Let's go with the bundles. You can learn that the problem with the bundles is that the Mishnah is speaking about bundles that were placed for storage. That could be our Mishnah. If the bundles were placed, stam to store them there, or let's say if they were wet, they were placed to dry there. If that would be the case of the Mishnah, then taka, our Mishnah would be an isur deoraisa. Then the problem would be that since it was not placed l'shem schach, it's not valid. And even if once you place them, you change your designation, say, you know what, I want to leave it for schach, it's already made. While you were making it, it wasn't kosher. That's the tasav min ha'asi. That will be one way of learning our Mishnah. Same thing can be with achoited begadish. When you made the haystack, none of it was kosher. You just made a haystack. The layer of the straw on the top was not made to be mesachech for anything underneath it. There was nothing underneath it. Once you hollowed it out, clearly, all of a sudden, it's already made. You can also learn both Mishnayasin. Both Mishnayasin can be connected to Gezeiras Oitzer, which would mean, understand that our Mishnah is speaking about a case where you put the bundles l'shem schach. If you put the bundles l'shem schach, not for storage, not to dry it out, then biblically it's okay. Elama, since it's normal that in storage houses there are coverings of bundles, if we would allow to sit in this sukkah, then you might end up sitting in that sukkah. Now that sukkah won't be kosher because by your oitzer you did not put the bundles l'shem sichuch. Same thing can be with the haystack. Now, how does the haystack work? How will the haystack be connected to Gezeiras Oitzer? So here we have to add something very important. That maybe what Rabbi Yechanan was telling us is that when you have the hollowed out haystack, no doubt that initially it's biblically invalid because tasav aleim and ha'asui. When you made the haystack, nothing was placed to create shade because there was no area underneath it. What happens if you have an haystack and now you hollow it out, and now you lift and you put down the top? What did we learn from Shmuel? Once you're minaneya it, now you rectified it. Maybe the Mishnah is saying even after you rectified it, the Chachamim made a gezeira not to use it. Mishum gezeiras oitzer.
Rabbi, can we say the same thing about a sukkah in a house?
For sure not, Tzvika, because when people have today the retractable roofs, when they put down the schach, they're putting it down, nach l'shei mitzvah. That's why they're doing it. I'm speaking about, that's what you're talking about, Tzvika, correct? And people have these...
Yeah, but it's not a tasim and asui, is it?
No, we don't care about the walls. We only care about the schach. In other words, when I open up my roof and I place the schach, I'm placing the schach not only to provide shade, I'm doing it l'shei mitzvah. Even according to Bishama, it's going to be good. It's great sukkah.
But Mishum Gezeiras Oitzer would apply also in a house in theory.
Probably not, because it's so far removed from a oitzer. So far removed. We're talking about people use retractable. Masha'inkin, if you have a little thing and you have bundles, and many people's storage houses also had stuff thrown on top. Looks very similar. Okay, so that was our doubt. Let's go back in the Gemara, and we resolved it. We hopped. Now, guys, the main thing will be that if we're going to learn pshat in the Mishnah of the haystack, that it's because of Gezeiras Oitzer, that will be a big chumrah. That would mean that by a haystack, even lifting it and putting it back down, midrabanan won't be a resolution. Even lifting it and putting it back down. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah nechsanan. No, I'll figure it out. We're trying to know what did Rabbi Yechanan mean. Our Mishnah. Or and chavile eitzim. Or chavile zuradim. Why does it say that ein misachachin bohen? Rabbi Yechanan clearly understood our Mishnah as a isur derabanan. He understood that our Mishnah is speaking about you placed the bundles for the mitzvah of Sukah. But since pa'amim, there are times, other times, you're coming at night, and for example, because it's wet. Just an example. Another example will be you're placing it on top for storage. You're tight, just put it somewhere. You're not putting it to provide shade. And you might there just change your mental designation by saying, you know what? Perfect sukkah, v'nim lachalel l'sichuch. And in that case, not in our case, in that case, the Torah says, Tasav Elohim min ha'asui. So therefore, the Chachamim aserd, even in our Mishnah, even when you place the bundles, l'shem schach, but they said it's not good. And by the way, all you need to do is unbundle it, like we mentioned. That's taka the pshat. You don't need to lift it and put it back down because you already put it l'shem schach. It's a gzeira derabanan. You can't have schach made out of bundles. You have to unbundle it. Now, so first of all, why did Rabbi Yochanan come to this conclusion? We'll see in a moment. But first, before the why, what? Rabbi Yochanan clearly understood our Mishnah to be a gzeira midrabanan, which must mean that the case of the Mishnah was it was put l'shem sichuch. The Chachamim were afraid that you will confuse it with another case. You might end up using the oitzer. Umi daha mishum gezeiras oitzer. It must be that Rabbi Yochanan understood the Mishnah and Daf Tezvav. It's only because Tasav Elohim min ha'asui, which means a leniency. Which means that if the only reason why you may not use the hollowed out haystack is because Tasav Elohim min ha'asui, so you can be misakin it. How can you be misakin it? By lifting it up and putting it back down. And once you do that, we're not going to make noch agzeira of oitzer, and we'll see in a moment why. Now, Rabbi Yaakov, why didn't Rabbi Yaakov know that? Rabbi Yaakov didn't have that information. Rabbi Yaakov, the first white line, because if he would have heard it, he would have known. Now that we know what Rabbi Yochanan says, now we want to say, why did he say so? How did Rabbi Yochanan come to that? Amar Rav Ashi, Otu, Chavilei Kash, Vechavilei Eitzim, is only because of Gezeiras Oitzer Ike? What? You could have learned Pshat in our Mishnah otherwise. Mishum Tasev Eloimin Ha'asui Leke. I mean, why? How did you see it from our Mishnah? Maybe our Mishnah is saying that if someone taka stored bundles are normally placed for storage, just a storage. So since it was placed for storage, it's not valid schach, biblically, and therefore Tasev Eloimin Ha'asui. How did he know that? That's not Pshat in the Mishnah. And similarly, when the Mishnah later writes, Hachoitet begadish, when you hollow out the haystack, how did he know that the issue there is only because of Tasav Elohim min ha'asu ika, or mishum gezeiras oitzer lekem? Maybe even more. Maybe even after you lift it and put it back down, it still looks like an oitzer. Maybe they should completely outlaw it. So the Gemara says no. That Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lach, that Rabbi Yochanan was medayik from the words of the Rebbe through which he understood, which is rabbinic, which is biblical. Over here, the way Rebbe worded the din of not being allowed to use bundles for schach is ein mesachechin bohen. He didn't write ein sukah. He didn't write psula. Remember the first daf beis amadal of psula, not like the tikkun. He wrote, don't do it is an expression of lechatchila. Lechatchila hu daf yud beis amad beis, the ein mesachechin. Mishum and taka mishum gezeiras oitzer, which implies it's a weaker expression that midoraisa shapit. Okay. And why is our Mishnah allowing it midoraisa? It must be that our Mishnah is speaking about the case that it was placed l'shem schach, but it looks like other storage sheds. So mishum gezeiras oitzer, they disallowed it. And guys, don't forget, that's why lifting it and putting it back down doesn't help. It was put down good. We don't want it to be similar to an oitzer. The only solution is to untie it. And when you untie it again, you don't even have to lift it, because on a biblical level, it's kosher schach. And over there, in the Mishnah of the hollowed haystack, the Mishnah writes much stronger words. The Mishnah doesn't write, don't do it. The Mishnah says, Einoi Sukah. Einoi Sukah means, afilu diyevet. You know why? Because the Midrei Raisanami Einoi Sukah. And now Rashi writes something gavaldik. But 1 second, what's the conclusion of this? By us, bundles are never good. Never good, ever. By the haystack, now that Rabbi Yochanan Taka knew that from the Mishnah, that Rebbe is just telling you that by a haystack as it is, since when you made the hollow, the schach is already there, it's not good. But there is a tikkun there. What will be the tikkun there? Lifting it and putting it back down. But hold on, I have a question. Why is that okay? Even if I'll lift it and I'll put it back down, why wouldn't we now say at least midrabanan? It's still not good because it looks like an oitzer. Oitzer also had, a lot of straw on top. No, the answer is no. The moment a person has to do an action to rectify it, no one will confuse it with an oitzer. The very fact that you have to pick it up and put it back down is in itself, that's what Rashi writes over here, a guarantee that you won't confuse it with an oitzer. And that's why indeed the maskana is that when you have a hollowed out haystack, we are lenient. Meaning, after you do the linaneya, you are masaking it completely. By the bundles, it won't help you. There's no lifting it and putting it back down. By the bundles, the solution must be, you have to untie it. Weiter. Says the Gemara. More, we're gonna learn about various items based on our rules or on additional gezeros that may not be used for schach. Amar Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. Sichacha bechitzim zecharim. So you have arrows, and arrows were comprised out of two parts. You have the iron tip, and then you have the wooden shaft that was connected to the iron tip. And the meaning over here, let's see if he has good. Okay, good enough. So you have the top picture, whoever sees a picture, is called male shafts because it is the wood that goes into the metal. The receptacle, the base kibble, is in the metal. We're not looking about the metal at all. We're looking only at the wood. Since this wood has no receptacle, this is your classical example of pshutei klei eitz, flat wooden utensils that are not susceptible to becoming tamei. There is no such rule when it comes to metal. Metal, even if it's pshutei, it's still susceptible when it's considered a utensil, a product. Since it doesn't have a klei kibul, even though it was made for a function, it's not susceptible, and that's why Rav says it's kash ksheda. You can cover your schach, with many of these shafts. But bin the kevois, if you have the type of shaft that has a hollow in it, it is from the metal that something protrudes, and it goes into the shaft. That is receptacle enough. It's not a pshutei klei eitz. It was made to be a shaft. It was made to be an arrow. It's not a raw material. It's now susceptible to becoming tamei, and therefore psula. Problem is, it's so obvious on both sides. So for that, now the tema nigzer zcharim aton nekevus, because they can look very similar. Komash malan that we make no such a decree. But let's go on the other side. When they quoted Rav saying that the female shafts are psula, again pshita, it's not a pshutei klei eitz, it has a receptacle. Here there's a chiddush, says the Gemara, mal the tema, that I know that right now it was built in a way where the metal tip, from the other side of the tip, something will protrude and go into the shaft. But hold on, it's not meant to be separated. This receptacle will be filled, it will be covered up by the metal weapon, and it's going to remain there. And one might have thought that base kibul ha'asui lemalois, if something has a receptacle, but it was made to be permanently filled, right? Not like a cup or a bowl, for example. You fill it up, you empty it out. So you would think la shmei kibul, it's not called a receptacle. Kamash malan, that as long as it still has the kibul, it's considered a receptacle, it's mekabel tuma, and therefore it's invalid on a biblical level for schach. Weiter. Guys, when we have flax and we produce linen strands, linen fibers out of it, let's just speak about the 3-step process. Step number 1 is you take the flax, which is a plant, and you soak it in water. Step number 2 is you beat those stalks by further separating the fibers from the wood, so to say. And step number 3 is you comb out the fibers. These are the 3 steps. So says Rabbi Baruch Rabbi Yechanan like this. If you already have combed flax, what's combed flax? The ready product, psula. Why is it psula? Big question over here. Why is it psula? It's very difficult to say that even after it's combed, it's not a ready product. How can you? It's not something that's going to be makabel tuma. It grew from the ground. It's now detached from the ground. So that's a big Machloikis in the Rishonim, the Rambam writes that since it no longer even resembles how it looked from when it grew from the ground, that's a new psul that we're learning. So it's take gedulim in haaretz, but it doesn't resemble it at all. Like that's the picture over here. This is already after it was combed. So that will be the invalidation. Let's go back in the Gemara. On the other side of the making of linen, behutzne pishtan, if it's completely unprocessed, completely l'chayra means it wasn't even soaked, then for sure it's kosher. Obviously you have to cut it off the ground. It's your classical, it's not mechuber, it's gedulim in haaretz, it's not mekabel tuma. However, there was a doubt that he had, and the doubt is if it's semi-processed. Now, where exactly is the semi-processed place? We're going to speak it out. That's not clear either. But hushnei pishtan is partially processed. Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't know mahu. I don't know whether it's still considered like the hutznei, or whether, let's go with the Rambam, it's so dissimilar from how it looked when it grew from the ground, it's no longer going to be kosher. Now the question is, what part of the process is the part that Rabbi Yochanan is using the word hushnei for? What's called partially processed? Like we mentioned, there are 3 steps. So the Gemara speaks it out. So this category of the doubt of Rabbi Yochanan, which is hushnei, I don't know. We don't know in Rabbi Yochanan. Mon nafshach here is, what is it? Does he mean idoyek? Is he speaking about the flax that was already beaten? So 2 steps. It was soaked and it was beaten, but it wasn't yet combed. That is what he's calling hushnei. What does that mean? So we infer something from this. Avol tarei, but if it was only soaked, only 1 step was done. 2 steps are yet to be done. Not it was doyek, not it was beaten, and certainly not combed. Then Rabbi Yochanan, will consider this hutznei, and therefore it's going to be kosher. He'll consider this still halachically unprocessed. Or, no, even there he had a doubt. Oidilma, tari, when it's soaked, even before it was beaten, even if only 1 step happened, still, hushnei karile, and on that he had a doubt. What's clear is if nothing happened yet, nothing happened. Unprocessed, it's good. Gavaldik eschach. When it's already processed to a point, zichar not good. Somewhere in between is a doubt, and now we have a doubt in Rabbi Yochanan's doubt. How large was his doubt? Weiter. Amar Rav Yehuda. Another din. Now we're learning new din. Hanei shushay. Shushay is ferns. One of the good things about Google is that you can Google it and Pashat see it's a plant. Or ushevatzrei. In English it's called Artemisia. Asach v'tehelfin, but look at a picture. So these are l'chayra, gedulim in akarka, gedulim in haaretz, not makabel tuma. You cut them off so it's not mechuber. Let's go further now that we learned that this new din. It's not a bundle. It's not completely dissimilar to its natural form. L'chayra would be great. So so why did he even have to say it? Because not everyone agreed to that. Abaya Amar, no. Bishushay ferns are good. But Shevatzrei, let's see the picture. Oh, that's it, Californian. Shevatzrei cannot be used. Why may they not be used? My Tama, we're going to Daf Yud Gimel, Kiven. The Sorei Reichayu, Rashi says that Mavish Reicham, they have a offensive odor. So therefore, Shavik Lehuvinafik, people will abandon and leave the Sukah. So that's a rabbinic invalidation of a Sukah. And I want you to know that in Halacha, you have in this offensive order 2 levels. It's interesting. You have something that's extremely revolting, however you define that, and that, we paskin, is a biblical invalidation. You can't live there. Not in the Rabbanan. We are dafka picking the shevatzrei because it's offensive, but it's not completely revolting. And here's where we're saying machloikas. So that's why Rav Yehuda says it's beseder. However you define the level of what number of this decimals of noise. Here we're speaking about a certain level of terrible odor. there's a concept of biblical invalidation, and then there's this, so to say, it's not extremely revolting, it's offensive, where you have the machlokes amoraim, whether it's asur to use that on a rabbinic level. Let's go weiter. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava, Hane, something similar. Hizmei v'hige, brambles and thorn bushes. Here again, if you can hear, the issue is not about odor, but it's similar to the concept. It will have you abandon the sukkah. So again, Rav Chanan says both are good. Why not? It meets all of the rules. Abaya Amar, no. Hizmei, you're right. Brambles are good. But misachechinon. But bihige, we have to focus on the hige. Hige are thorn bushes. Loi misachechin. Why? My tama, because kiven the nasri tarfayu, since its leaves continuously fall off. Guys, continuously means not when the wind blows. That's not a problem. It means that as is, it's continuously falling into your soup or into your food.
In New York.
In New York, mamish, but by New York, that's the why I wanted to add that, because any type of schach that becomes verbreckelt because of the wind is not a problem halachically. Because you would argue if it's because of the wind. But these hige, the problem with the hige is that it can be ruig, you can be in LA, but you put the hige, it's going to continuously fall into your, too much of it will fall down. The same concept of shavik la v'nafik, a person will abandon and leave the sukkah, and that's a rabbinic new invalidation. Guys, we have a few more minutes, let's go just a little bit weiter. Amarav Gidel Amarav. Another halach. And like this, that's connected to our Mishnah that we learned that bundles are rabbinically invalid. Because gezeiras oitzer. Hold on, so we're going to limit it. Hi afkusa the dikla. If you have a date palm tree, towards its trunk, towards the lower parts, you have offshoots. Now the offshoots are naturally bundled. It's interesting. In other words, there are many shoots, but they come out of one little trunk. So do we view that as a bundle? So says Rav Gidel that which is afkusa, that which goes out of the dikla, even though you might have argued it's similar to a bundle, no problem. Misachechin buhu. You are allowed to use it. Even midrabanan, afal gav de agidei. Even though that they are bound together, even though, I don't know if that's the picture, but okay, and I don't think that's the picture. That's all the way on the top. I think it's more on the bottom. Here you're just showing me dates. Even though they resemble a bundle, it's not called a bundle halachically. Why? Listen to the words. Eged bidei shamayim. Eged bidei shamayim. What's the whole gezerah? The gezerah is gezeiras oitzer. Gezeiras oitzer, people would put bundles that human beings bundled. And this is a natural bundling. Lo shmei eged. Now, I want to add, the Gemara adds something important. Don't think he's speaking about offshoots that are only naturally connected to their source. Even if you take that and you add a string and you bundle the other side of it to make them even more tight, to bind them tighter together. So you have something that's naturally connected on one side. There are many offshoots. So the vart over here is, the Gemara adds, even if you are binding the offshoots from the other side, and that's not natural, that is also allowed to be used. Iged, bechad, lo yishmei iged. Binding around something that's already bechad. Bechad means it's already a single object. Bechetzonius, when you go away from the trunk, it separated itself. It never really separated itself. It's not something that's considered bound, and you can use it lechatchila for the schach. That's the yidden, that we are all iged bechad. Notice in our source we are one. We don't need aguda. We are already bound together, and therefore it may be used even on a rabbinic level for schach. We'll stop over here to be continued.